faith that make the same grip on the same ship. So we must push one common intention. It's for a better life in the region. For we woman and we children. That must be the ambition of the Caribbean and the Caribbean and the Caribbean.
And welcome to today's edition of Politics 101, the voice of the Black Stallion. In the background, the Caribbean Man. The Caribbean Man. Big song, 1979. Black Stallion won with that song. It's still the anthem of Caribbean integration. Still the anthem of Caribbean integration. Welcome to you wherever you're joining us from, whether you're joining us from Guyana, inside of Guyana, wherever you're joining us from, welcome to Politics 101. If you're joining us from the Caribbean, North America, Europe, wherever you're joining us from, welcome to Politics 101. It's good to be a Guyanese, it's good to be West Indian. What Nettleford would say, we are all we have, and we have to rally. And if you are a teacher, welcome to Politics 101. Welcome to Politics 101. And if you're not a teacher, we are all connected to teachers because we all were taught by teachers. Our children, our nieces and nephews, grandchildren, they all have to be taught by teachers. And the teachers are on the move now. They're on the move. They are on strike. And it's picking up steam. And nobody wants to strike. Nobody wants to close down our schools. That is why you don't have a strike every day. It's a last resort. And we've been talking on this program all the time about the need for better income for our workers, especially those in the public sector. We've been talking about that. We in the WPA, we have put proposals on the table. We have said, increase the wages and salaries within the context of our growth, economic growth, and cost of living. When you take all of that into consideration, adjust your wages and salaries against that background. And then we say, go further. Supplement that income with a universal basic income. The Buxton proposal, it's been on the table since 2018. Imagine if those workers, those teachers, if the government had sat down with the union and negotiate with the union and give the union some of what they're asking for, and then implement the Buxton proposals, you think teachers would have been on the road? No. Now is the time for us to deal with this issue of wages and salaries. We cannot continue to talk about how much the economy is growing. And we on Politics 101, Buxton, Guyana Morning Time, the WPA, we are not denying. We have accepted that our GDP is growing, and it is growing, and it means something. It's real. It's not fake. It's real. But there are consequences. There are consequences for that. You can't want to say that the GDP is growing and economic growth is skyrocketing, and then you're paying your workers starvation wage. It's a contradiction. Professor Clive Thomas is here with us tonight. And Professor, on the program we were doing on international politics the other night, said that, my God, I mean, if we deal with the issue of development in a serious way, our Caribbean could be a more confident place. If our politicians can be more confident and recognize what we have and what we can do with what we have. Welcome to Politics 101. Menton is our open word edition. The strike is on, and that's what we are going to be dealing with. It's simple. It's simple. You can't. I mean, people have been asking, because so many people seem to have been taken by surprise that so many teachers have come out on strike and that the strike is successful, because so many people felt that, Guyanese have been so beaten down that it's going to be difficult to get people to come out and strike. And it was not unreasonable to think so. But the very thing that the government is using in its favor, that is that, look, our economy is growing. 1.14 trillion budget. You think you're going to say that to human beings, and they are going to sit down and say, you are giving us peanuts and you're saying so? Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, and that is why I think our position is correct. Do not deny it. Do not deny that there is growth. Do not deny that despite a not so perfect contract, that money is coming into our country. Do not deny that. And the fact that we have taken that position, we do not deny the growth. We do not deny that despite a bad contract, we are getting monies that we never got before. That those two factors, I believe, play an important role in driving our workers. And if you notice, it's not just the African Guyanese teachers. Indian Guyanese teachers are out there too. And again, multiracialism is not about emotions. It's about your policies. And in this case, the government policies are driving its own supporters to ask for more. And we don't have to go and invent things. We are human beings. We are human beings. And we are a community with a history. And people are part of that history even when they're not immediately conscious of that history. Welcome to Politics 101. Professor Clive Thomas is here. Let me bring him in. Professor Thomas, good evening.
Good evening, David.
We have not denied, and I think you are very, very, very strong on that.
Very strong, yeah.
Very strong on that. Don't lie, don't deny. We have a windfall. The GDP is growing, and that should not be downplayed. Despite all the challenges in relation to the contract, we still are getting a windfall. You are very strong on that.
Yeah.
Do you think that we are beginning to see a shift in public consciousness as it relates to those issues? Because, and I take you back to about 2 years ago, when I think it was the IRI that did a poll, and they found that Guyanese were not too much enthused by the development in the petrol industry and so on. And I remember interviewing you, and you said you were a little bit, well, more than a little bit, more than a little bit. Um, you were not swayed by that. So I want to remind you of that. In answering the question, do you think that we are making headway in terms of public consciousness of our transition to a petrol state?
Yeah, I think that we have definitely been on a track for doing that. I think it started in 2022, 23. Um, in fact, my budget analysis sought to establish the fact that for the first time in 2023, we were able to nominate Guyana as the fastest rising petrol state in the entire Americas. And my analysis of the budget for 2024, which I've already started in a preliminary way, gives complete confirmation, solid confirmation, that the facts which have evolved since then demonstrated that nomination has been extremely well earned. It is not a fantasy that we are in the midst of so much plenty compared to the poverty and the miserization, the lack of income that we had to endure in the 70s and the 80s, that we are in an entirely different place on the continuum of the existence of Guyana. And I think what is important is for us to make the best use of that. It is who has the clearest idea of how and where we want to go that will ensure success in what happens. My biggest fear at the moment, and I said early, I've said it before already in the columns in the papers, press, is that the government might waste this rainfall by investing in vanity projects. And I noticed that one of them has been floated again. I think the gas the energy project comes perilously close to that. And now I hear about a modular refinery for sugar. I think those are ways in which we can waste the windfall that we have gotten from the oil and gas by spending on projects which in the long run will prove that it can only be sustained if we transfer the surpluses that we earn from the windfall incomes into subsidies to these sectors. And that will mean that we're not really continuing a sustainable growth path. We're converting it into negative growth, into problems of despair further down the line when we have to close the refineries, whether it's the gas to energy or whether it might be modular sugar refinery, because we can get all those projects at a far, far cheaper price than we can get them if we try to produce them on our own. For example, right now, at least when I was in charge of the sugar industry, the average price of or cost of producing sugar is around 40 cents, US cents per pound. The world price has not reached that yet. So every ounce, every pound of sugar we produce and we sell in Europe or North America, we are subsidizing those consumers, not even subsidizing our consumers because we only consume a tiny fraction of the sugar we produce. That is a transfer surplus of our wealth in the sugar industry directly to consumers into Europe and Britain. If we were to produce at about a half the price at which they're going to be paying for the sugar, and then lose all that income because it is not a profitable industry to be in. So we have to take strategic views and turn those things around. We need to exploit the things that might have specialist markets for, like Demerara sugar, which is a famed sugar worldwide, converting the cane to briquettes. Those are the things that we were invested a lot of effort and money into before I stopped, just before I ended my term as head of the Sky Circle, I've heard no discussion and no comment on any of those projects. We invited some of the best experts in the world to come here to do feasibility studies for us, to convert all the ponds and lakes. We have 100 miles of waterway for every square mile of thing. Sorry about that.
Yes,
That's
I
the
know.
normal traffic. Going out the box on. Yeah, we have 100 miles of water roadways and waterways. So we have an environment in which fishing can turn out to be an extremely profitable enterprise. We've done feasibility studies in them. I've never heard one word mentioned about any of the studies we did while we were there. I think even the party I was supposed to be chairing the sugar industry for has never even mentioned a word of it since the election. So all that stuff gone to waste
Yeah,
because about 3 years or more now.
3 years or more. And you mentioned the refinery that they've signed an MOU, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, talk a little bit more of that. How will a refinery help us at this time or not help us?
Well, what the argument is that if you go to higher stages of manufacturing, you get more value added onto the products that we get locally that are primary. And
Mhm.
from there, we can propel investments and growth. But the thing is that most of these higher valued products that come out of primary products like sugar and oil have high capital costs, require large markets. So, a
Mhm.
priori, you have to establish and move very rapidly into an export market to make it feasible.
Yeah.
So, we have to be very judicious, therefore, in going that way. That is why the WP has recommended in the last elections that the APNU take the position of focusing on renewables, types of energy to complement what is being found in the petroleum sector that Ghana is heavily endowed with. And if you think about it carefully, all the leading sectors of renewables, whether it be solar energy, whether it be tidal energy, whether it be energy from biofuels, whatever it is, we have great potential and great opportunities for being a major exporter because we can find markets for them given the transition that is on the way. So the export of the oil and gas must be complemented with the diversification of the source of energy. And to do that, you need to establish a basis for an export market where we can use Guyana as a base and not as having to go elsewhere to locate the market, to find a market to start with. If you think of the continent of Latin America, there's great scope and headway, and there's studies to show this anyhow, which we will have to read at some point in time, that the opportunities for transcontinental sharing of energy supplies are tremendous. And we also know that for any country to become serious in its capacity to develop, it must be invested in science and technology. So I feel that we should use whatever surpluses that we have to develop the innovative science and technology sector around renewables because we have a natural market for sunlight, whatever it is. I thought the sugarcane briquettes was extremely attractive because here you can convert the biomass into a carbon product which people can burn in Europe during the winter. And I thought it had a very attractive market and niche, in that you could tell people when they're born in the chimney that you're also saving the environment. And I think if you convert them into practical briquettes that they could keep and not mess up the place like the regular charcoal, it would be a tremendous opportunity for making sales. All those things should be in the files at the ISO headquarters.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I
Professor.
brought that one discussion of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The thing
Yeah.
that bothers me is that those proposals for modular refineries look to me like get rich schemes that a lot of overseas Guyanese seem to want to get into since they hear Guyana got all that oil and got that potential market.
Mm-hmm.
Because the things are high cost and they depend on trapping the market to buy your product.
Mm-hmm.
No ring fencing it that you can't buy from other sources. And they're allowed to exploit that market control that you exercise. The monopolization of sales to these modular refineries as a way of ensuring that they can do it profitably for the private person, while in fact making the consumers bear the cost of it by paying far higher prices than what they would have to pay if the market were left competitive. So
Professor
these are
Clive,
the challenges that we have to face.
yes, Professor Clive Thomas here. We are talking about this refinery that the government is now heading in the direction of. Again, we ask, how is this going to benefit the country in the long run? How is this going to benefit the people of the country in the long run? Professor Thomas, let's turn our attention to the strike, the teachers' strike.
Yeah.
1999, that's what, almost 25 years ago.
Yeah.
You were part of the Armstrong arbitration, yes, committee. And one can trace this strike all the way back to that strike in 1999 and the arbitration that was set up and the awards of the arbitration. Refresh our memory. What were the issues before that arbitration committee in 1999?
Well, the central issue is the same that exists now. Pay and working conditions.
There you go.
Conditions of the contract, like access to services and entitlements outside of normal pay. I think that those continue because the government really is engaged in employing the poor. So I call them the employed poor. They they're employed, but they're poor. The Buxton proposal was supposed to supplement their salaries and ensure that the households were earning, well, as you know, at least $1 million more annually, or 5,000 US annually, to supplement what they were getting from the government as pay. And every household would get it so that no household could claim that they were poor, but they would pay the taxes that were due on it, depending on the size of income they were earning within the state sector. So somebody like a permanent secretary might have paid back, I don't know, at the top of the rate might be 60, 70, 80, probably 80% of it in taxes. By the bottom, lower levels where the people are now moving into the tax range, they would pay probably minimal amounts, if any, but certainly not more than about 10% of it in tax. So that's the way in which we would try to ensure that it maintains its progressive character, in the sense that those who could afford to pay more would pay more taxes. And that's how we thought we would ensure that we don't have any employed poor. The government won't be a catchment area for a whole set of suffering poor people hanging on to them for jobs. Because the system of welfare should be doing that.
Yeah.
And if you can make them productive, you don't want them to come to work saying, I feel sick today because the nutrition is not good. But all the excuses, not the excuses, the problems that occur in families that are deprived. making sure you can get your kids to school because you can get somebody to look after them while they are at school. You can afford it. Things like that would be taken care of. But instead, the government preferred to keep these employed poor and treat them as they were kept, as just hangers on. And they developed very competitive relationships with the union that was in charge of these work. But these workers joined and supported. So the relationship was never one of a professional body representing the workers and the government. It was the government looking down on these hangers on, as they probably thought of them, that they were paying and therefore entitled to get get whatever obedience that they wanted out of them.
Yeah.
And that was not a good environment for industrial relations. And that is why we see that they could even have the temerity to suggest that they would stop taking out the Jews at the first sign of a protest. I mean, you've got to be a certain type of low mind to think about doing something like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
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 And
Yeah.
that obviously exists in their relationship and the way in which they see the workers. Because, your own conscience will tell you can't really tell them, but I going to disabuse your, or remove your capacity to be a member of a union by refusing to take out the Jews and pay it over to the union because we have a dispute. I mean, it's so unprofessional.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so low class. You don't expect the government to do
A
that.
government to do that, a kind of mean-spiritedness.
Yeah. I call it low class.
Low class, yes, yes. Professor, the vice president has given an economic explanation as to why they can't pay the teachers more. He says the volatile oil prices means that they can't pay the teachers. You are an economist, please. Please. And I notice you're laughing. And I laugh and I heard it when
compare the oil prices annually since we start producing 2021, 22, 23, and now 24. Every year it has gone up. Every year, not only the quantity of oil, but the price of oil. In fact, it hasn't risen as much as I thought it would have risen. In fact, I think between 20 and 21, or 21 and 22, the price grew by about 50%. There's significant upward pressure on the prices. But this has not been sustained largely because the American president has been making strenuous efforts to keep the price of oil down. America, although it's supposed to be leading this anti-carbon emission type of energy around the world, is now the world's largest producer of oil, the largest ever in history.
Yeah.
They're producing something like 13.4 billion barrels of oil a day. You would never think that would be possible. And that is what is keeping America out of becoming a place where inflation is almost running away.
But despite all of that, Professor, Guyana is not doing too badly.
Guyana is not doing too badly because the price was those earlier models that were built by the IDB and so on. They assumed the price of $48 per barrel.
Mm-hmm.
It's a long time since I hear a price like that, because it's at least $30 more.
Yes.
Over the past 3 years, 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. So we've established that the government does have enough resources going around. One just have to look at the budget, the size of the budget. Is that an indication?
But they give the price in the budget. The price of oil is given in the budget. Yeah.
In the budget, but I mean the size of the budget. Isn't that an indication that there are resources going around that you can pay your public servants, your teachers, more wages and salaries?
Yeah. Of course. If the Buxton proposal can be done, you should do it through that, I believe, to start with.
Yeah.
So as to make sure that it is a national effort that they will definitely cover all your public servants.
Yes. Professor, another big issue, and I remember coming into politics as a small boy in the 1970s, and I heard Walter Rodney at the street corner dealing with this issue of a political strike. The government saying that the strike is political and hence it is illegal. And I remember Walter Rodney saying that all strikes are political because workers are striking against the government. The government itself is a political entity. I want, please deal with that issue, because I think we have to make a distinction here between political and partisan.
Well, I would say that every strike against the government, because the government is the main employer,
Yes,
can be treated as political.
yes,
But usually, when the phrase is used, it is used to refer to strikes within the private sector,
hmm,
which may have in some way or the other, political motive.
right,
I mean, I don't know the specific circumstance when that would happen. So any strike against the public service is a political strike because it's against the political control elements in the state sector, those who control employment on the behalf of the state. That by definition is political. I
yes,
won't take those labels seriously.
yes. But the label that the strike is illegal is what I think
If it's illegal,
is
let them take
worrying.
it to court.
Can you deal with that, please?
Well, I'm no lawyer, but I would say clearly it's hard to say that with removal of your services are based on a contract from any employer can never be challenged in the court. Because otherwise it would be slavery. The
Yes,
only unenforceable contract between an employer and the employee is a slave contract. That's the distinction between slavery and every other form of human bondage. You bound it to the state through terms and contracts, but there's no permanent contract, no contract that binds you forever to any single employee. And nowhere in the world where this slavery does not exist can you ever say that you have an unfettered binding contract with employees, unless it's a slave system. And I hope they're not emulating that now.
yeah,
Those
yeah,
contracts you used to find in the United States. If you go, there were verbal contracts too. Because you just tell the guy you my slave, and was enough. And you kept in the plantation. And that contract could not be broken. So the only enforceable binding contract is a slave contract. I won't be surprised if that's what they were thinking about, thinking back over the glory days when they could use that against workers. But
hmm,
nowhere in the world can anybody win because the United Nations now established international human rights. And nowhere in the world can anybody argue legally that is a binding forward-looking contract for any employment by any citizen or anybody.
Professor, isn't it somewhat surprising that in the United States, let's take the United States, in the last year, we have seen a resurgence of union activity. We even had the president of the United States going on to a picket line,
Mm.
and the trade unions winning a lot for their membership, and the general public, when polled, saw trade union in a different light. They feel the trade unions are important, and that's the leading capitalist country in the world. And in Guyana, we have seen this union busting. You made reference to the refusal to deduct union dues, but they're also telling the workers that if you go on strike, we are going to withhold your wages and salaries.
Yeah.
Isn't that coming from a Guyana? I mean, you're a third
Coming
world
from a party that used to call itself socialist.
socialist.
Yeah, the standards have fallen low. The standards have fallen low.
Professor, since 2020, we have seen the government really, in a sense, doing as it pleases. It has used the one-seat majority in Parliament, in the National Assembly, to practically do what it feels like doing. It has been vicious against any form of dissent, to the point where people had begun to doubt that workers, citizens would even think about coming out on strike or any form of public protest. Given what we have seen since the strike began, there seem to have been quite a very good turnout as far as the teachers' response to the strike activity. I want you to deal with that. Apart, the feeling that workers have been so beaten down that they wouldn't take action, they wouldn't answer the call of their union. And the fact that workers, teachers, not just teachers who belong to the political constituency of the opposition, but also Indo-Guyanese teachers, Amerindian teachers answering this call. Help us make sense of what I've laid out there.
I think the problem is really one that is counterintuitive. Some people believe that the more and more privation, the more and more you impoverish people, the more and more they're likely to revolt. But in actual fact, the historical experience suggests that on average, in times when the opportunities seem to be growing, opportunities for change, and that is why I was telling people to focus on the prospects of change that this all in fall is bringing. When they see opportunities for change to become effective, that's when they move. In fact, the greatest probably revolutionary moments are the cusp of such propitious events when the change in the real material circumstances of people are really possible. It's there not because they like to go further and deep into the gutter, but partly because we can get out of the entire situation. So that's the paradox the government has to deal with. And it boasts on the one hand of an oil windfall that gratuitously and thankfully has happened to Guyana. They have to deal with consequences as well of that wealth. So we have to recognize that in the politics of plenty, there are dangers for the government precisely because people see with this finding of the oil that there are opportunities for a completely different type of society and set of relations than the one they have. You increase the incentive to put in an effort because the likelihood of big changes are rising every day as long as that windfall exists out there. So I would draw great heart from all of these developments. Personally, that is my view. But it's hard sometimes to convince people who would insist that nothing is better, nothing improves, nothing changing. It's the prospect of change that really drives people to change.
Yeah. Professor Clive Thomas, as usual, being quite modest there, but we got it right. We got it right, and I think, and I know that Professor Thomas has been instrumental in guiding us along that path. We got it right when others were saying that, look, not much has changed. We in the WPA kept saying that, look, I mean, do not underrate this growth. Do not underrate the growth in the GDP. It might not always be reflective in people's material circumstances, but it is real. It is the measurement that they use, and it is real. And when others were saying that, look, the contract is terrible and Guyanese are not getting anything, we kept saying that we have enough and we should use it properly. Universal basic income, cash transfers via the Buxton proposal. I think Professor Clive Thomas is being modest. I am not so modest to say we got it right. We got it right. There are times in history that political parties and political activists have to see possibilities and have to situate themselves within the context of those possibilities and do what is necessary. What is necessary? What is necessary? Professor Thomas, the government has refused to go to arbitration. Is that a mistake? And what could be influencing them not to want to go to arbitration?
The first thing that comes to mind is the arrogance of power.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, you think you know it all, so the arbitrator can't tell you anything.
Yeah.
So that was what I think, because they might feel that going to arbitration is a concession to give them the stance they're taking about this strike. I think they're probably shocked that the teachers actually struck.
Yeah.
They didn't think they had it in them.
Yeah. 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 I think you're right here, Professor. Another glaring thing, and you've talked about that, is the selective way in which the government deals with some trade unions and deals differently with other trade unions. And the workers on the streets, I was listening to some of the commentary, and they're saying, what's wrong with us? I mean, when GAWU strike,
I know.
you call GAWU to the table, you don't deduct, you don't threaten to discontinue deducting dues to GAWU. You don't threaten GAWU workers and tell them you're going to withhold the pay when you go to strike. But you are doing that to us.
Yeah.
Speak to that, Professor, because
they will have to pay the consequences of that type of decision making.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is a very divided society. And political partisanship of that type never succeeds in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it brings your supporters closer to you, it also brings animosity and hate and conflict. So it is never a good choice for government to make. So the principles of good governance, that is treating people as equals, treating them even-handedly, maintaining confidence in the relationship, and honoring it in spirit and letter, remain the foundations of good human behavior. And I would recommend that to the government.
Professor Clive Thomas here, speaking on the teachers' strike that is ongoing. And of course, we've seen quite a response on the part of teachers. Teachers across the board have come out in support, and you only have to listen to teachers themselves and listen to what they're saying. And the whole question of consciousness comes into play, because I think a lot of times we political activists underestimate the importance of building consciousness among the population, building an awareness of the situation. And I think as we listen to the teachers on the streets, we can't help but recognizing that the role of consciousness is really important. Professor Thomas, you have spoken about consciousness and consciousness raising and its importance to politics and economics.
Yes, I have. That's my principal drive.
Yes. Professor, is there anything you want to discuss before we go?
No, I think we've said quite a lot. And there's an ongoing series. So what we missed today, we will capture next time.
We will capture next time. Professor Clive Thomas writes a column in the Stabrook News, Guyana and the wider world. You can read his column there every Sunday, Guyana on the wider world, and he discusses these issues from a political economy lens. Professor, thank you very much for coming.
Okay, thanks, David.
Professor Clive Thomas there talking about the strike, talking about this proposed refinery. We're going to continue to cover the strike. We're going to continue to encourage the workers to stick to their guns, their proverbial guns, because in struggle, that's the only way you get power to concede something. The workers' case is a just case. Thank you all again for staying with us. And we are going to be back on Monday. We're going to be back on Monday. So please, and as we say, love is the watchword here on Politics 101.
One race from the same place that make the same trip on the same ship. So we must push one common intention. It's for a better life in the region, for we women and we children.